So a little while ago, I said I was going to do a video on some builds that would help people out with siege mode, and then I ended up grinding this game to the point where I needed to step back and just take a little break, mix things up a little bit, play some different games, and completely forgot about it. But today we're going to right that wrong. So I'm going to go through all the different class builds that I use for every single class in the game that has helped me complete waves 1 through 25 on both normal and hard for Space Marine 2 Siege mode. I'm going to go through not only the perks, but also the weapons that I use and the class setups. I'll even show you the weapon perks and everything, and discuss a little bit on why I use each one, and also just kind of briefly throw out my personal thoughts on how each class performs within Siege mode itself. But we're going to start off right off the bat with the Tactical Marine here. So there's two different weapon loadouts that I would recommend. The first one is going to be the heavy bolt rifle here. Personally, I really like this because it has good accuracy, a solid rate of fire, a lot of ammo, also a decent headshot multiplier. Now I am going to be running the Gathelmore Crusade, the alpha variant, just because it gets a few little bonuses in some of the stats that I really like. Down below, you can pause. That's the perk tree setup that I use. The other nice thing about the heavy bolt rifle here is that this is really good with one of the tactical's siege challenges, which is getting so many headshots on enemies. Really easy way to rack up at least 20 to 30 per magazine, and you can quickly complete that challenge, get some more points to spend on either a Dreadnought, Cadians, whatever it may be. You'll at least have some extra points. Next, I do use the heavy bolt pistol. That is my primary sidearm of choice. Ever since they really buffed it, I haven't found a reason to really use anything else other than the little Melta pistol here, or I'm sorry, the Inferno pistol, which I'll show you on which classes I use that on. Now, we are going to be using mostly the Ophelian Liberation, the alpha variant. Now, I will say sometimes I will use the Gathelmore Crusade just because I do like the little accuracy buff. Here's the perk tree, but the main reason that I'm using this particular heavy bolt pistol is just because you get some extra ammo in reserve. So if you ever do run out with your primary, even though ammo, or at least the small little ammo boxes, are pretty cheap to afford, sometimes it's better to invest your points in different little bonuses here and there. So I do like having just a little bit of extra ammo if I need it. And then finally, of course, the chainsword. Again, we are going to be running the Aquilian Dedication. This is the fencing style. Personally, I just really like fencing. I know it kind of is a little bit of a crutch, but this game is very heavily melee focused, and especially in siege mode, you can oftentimes get pretty easily overwhelmed. So just having that nice little buffer zone in case you're getting attacked by multiple enemies at once to successfully parry is always really nice. Now, the other loadout that I do use, and I would say this is specifically only for Tyranids, just because the Melta rifle itself does get a little bit of a damage nerf when it comes to chaos enemies. But normally, once I complete my headshot challenges and then I'm playing against Tyranids, I do like to switch over to the Melta rifle, mostly just because it's fun. It mixes things up a little bit, but it's also got some really good wave clearing capabilities to it. Sorry, just had to take a sip of water there real quick, but I am going to be, again, running the Ophelian Liberation. Honestly, the only reason I'm picking this is because it's got the higher magazine capacity and ammo reserve. Unfortunately, the reload time on all three of the different Melta variants, it's rather long, so anything that's going to allow me to postpone a reload as long as possible is always really nice. Plus, I don't really find myself trying to sneak away a little bit of range, or that the one extra point in the rate of fire really does a whole lot for me. So, just my personal pick. I like the extra ammo. Now, looking at the perks here, the first one that we're going to start off with is Balanced Distribution. This is just going to give our primary weapon 10% more damage. Our secondary will take a 10% penalty to it. However, most of the time I'm going to be using my primary weapon. I'm really only going to be using my secondary if I run out of ammo. Moving into our second core slot here, I do take Relentless Pursuit. Anytime you do a gun strike, you're going to get 25% extra range damage for 5 seconds. Honestly, I find myself doing a lot of gun strikes, so this is allowing me to consistently do a bunch of extra damage, especially because there's no cooldown timer on it. So anytime you do a gun strike for 5 seconds, you get 25% more damage, and it does add up rather quickly. Moving into our third perk here, we have Emperor's Vengeance. Just something nice to keep your ammo topped off. Anytime that you kill a Majoris level enemy or higher, you do get back 1 full magazine to your primary weapon. There is a cooldown on this for 30 seconds. However, it's still something that's worthwhile to grab, because as you get into some of the higher waves, you're going to be able to get multiple magazines back for your primary weapon, normally just in 1 round. Probably the best team perk in all of Siege, Secure Stockpile. Essentially, every 60 seconds, everybody gets an equipment recharge. So if you're running a Melt-A-Bomb, you drop it, 60 seconds goes by, you just got another free Melt-A-Bomb and you didn't have to do anything for it. This is truly a phenomenal perk, and it's one that is just crazy important if you're really struggling with Siege mode. Especially myself, I love this for the Melt-A-Bombs. That's why I use them for an example. There's just something so nice about seeing right where the enemy's about to come from, especially Chaos. Setting down a nice little Melt-A-Bomb, wait for some of the bigger units to spawn in, and then just watching everything go up in flames. Moving on to the gear perks. For the first one, we have Vital Data. Anytime you scan an Extremis or Terminus level enemy, you get a 50% charge to your Auspex scan. There are so many Extremis within Siege mode, especially on the higher levels. You're going to have your Auspex being able to fire off multiple times in a round a lot of the time. Then going into Battle Focused, anytime you get a perfectly timed parry or block, it's going to mark the enemy with an Auspex scan, which is going to allow you to do a little bit of extra damage to it. Plus, it is going to help with some of the challenges that are associated with the tactical class in and of itself. So again, you're also not just going to be doing damage to the enemy or doing more damage to the enemy, but you're also going to be working towards some of your challenges so you can have more points to put into whatever it is that the team needs. Finally, Expert Timing. This gives your Auspex scan an additional 75% damage. However, the duration is going to be reduced by 4 seconds or 50% because the base level is only 8 seconds. Honestly, for me, that's a trade-off that I'm willing to make, because a lot of times with that 75% damage increase, I'm still going to be able to knock multiple Majoris enemies to a point where they can be executed. So it's something that to me is worthwhile, especially when you're going up against Tyranid enemies. As long as you take out a Majoris, if there's a bunch of little Minoris around it, as long as you just smack the Majoris, all the little ones around it, they're going to perish as well. Moving into the signature perk, I use Radiating Impact. So essentially, whenever you do a melee finisher on anything, and this is even when like some of the little gaunts try to hop at you, anytime that you perform a melee finisher, it's going to cause significant AoE damage within a 10-meter radius. Now, there is a cooldown for this for 90 seconds. A lot of times, this AoE damage is enough to take a full health Majoris down to an incapacitated state, so you can bounce from one execution to another. Now, one thing that I do want to throw out with this is that AoE starts from wherever you initiate the execution. So it doesn't actually happen when you close in on the target. So if you are at the very end of wherever, the input queue is for an execution, that AoE is going to start right there. So just be aware of that, because there have been a lot of times where in the heat of the moment, I've kind of forgotten about it, when if I would have just maybe waited a few moments or if I wouldn't have tried to close the distance, probably could have gotten a lot more kills with it. But it's just a nice way that if you are being mobbed and you need to clear some kind of working space, very quick and easy way to do it. Again, though, there is a 90-second cooldown to this, so it's not like you're going to be firing them off all the time, but when you do, they can definitely get you out of a very tight spot. So that is it for the tactical. Now we're jumping over to the assault. So for our sidearm, it's going to be, again, the heavy bolt pistol. I already talked about the two that I use. Now, in terms of the melee weapon, we are actually going to jump back again to the chainsword here, just because I realized I didn't throw out my perk tree for that. But there, that is. Something I do want to throw out, too, about the chainsword. Personally, I think it's the best melee weapon in the game. It's probably the easiest to learn and to use. That being said, on the assault, I do like to use the thunder hammer, mostly because I've gotten pretty good at learning its play style. It is a little slow and sluggish, so that might throw some newer players off, and if you do find yourself struggling, it is worthwhile throwing on the chainsword. You also do have access to the power fist, which is something I've been messing around with recently, but I still haven't completely mastered it to the level where I feel comfortable throwing out that, hey, this is definitely something to use. But I have noticed a lot of people really using it to great effect, so it's still something I'm pumping a little bit more time in to myself, as well as the plasma pistol, just to see if there's any other potential builds with that I might really enjoy. But I do use the thunder hammer. It's also just cool. Again, everything in terms of the melee weapons, they are all going to be fencing. One of the nice things, though, about the last update is a lot of the fencing weapons do have faster melee speed. So the thunder hammer is still going to be slow and sluggish, but it's not going to be as bad as what it used to be. And again, if that slowness to it, if you find yourself struggling with it, or if you find yourself going into a lot of charge attacks and getting yourself knocked back, maybe take some time, learn the thunder hammer in a different setting. Nothing wrong with throwing on the chainsword. They did also buff the damage that's done from the ground pound attack with not only the chainsword, but also the power sword and the power fist as well. Now moving into the perk tree, unfortunately with the assault, a lot of the perks that you're really going to want, they're all going to be kind of towards the end. But let's get right into it with the first core perk. That is armor reinforcement. Any non-finisher gun strike is going to restore one armor segment. I do like using this because unlike the Bulwark, so this and the Bulwark are both very heavily melee focused classes. The Bulwark at least does have a little bit more on the defensive side because you do have that big ass shield. However, for the assault, you really don't have that. So any way that you can keep your defenses up, because a lot of times when you're doing ground pounds, you're going to be going into big hordes of enemies. Of course, you're not going to kill all of them. They're going to immediately aggro towards you. This is just going to be a nice little way to make sure that even if you are putting yourself into those situations repeatedly, you can hopefully keep your armor topped up. The next perk is consecutive execution. Now, this is also a perk that is available on a lot of other classes. However, I only use it on this and the Vanguard just because for other classes, I do think there are perks that are just slightly better or that I prefer using. But this is definitely one where if it is available on the class that you're running, it's very viable to pick. Anytime you kill 7 enemies in rapid succession, you get a free equipment charge. So kind of essentially the same thing as the team perk for the tactical. However, this is for you on the individual level. The only caveat to it is it has a 90-second cooldown instead of a 60-second cooldown, and you earn it by killing 7 enemies in rapid succession, which with the assault is extremely easy to do. Something else to keep in mind, if you're not already on a cooldown, and let's just say again, you're planting a melted bomb right at like a little chaos gate where enemies are about to spawn in, you set it off, that will actually recharge your equipment as well, so you can almost get 2 for the price of 1. But Just be aware, though, that second one, once you plant that, you are going to be on your cooldown timer. Next, knowledge of the enemy. It's just a generic 15% melee damage increase for major and majorous enemies. Thunderhammer already does quite a bit of damage. That little extra 15%, sometimes it's enough to take one less hit, or if you have an enemy that's almost dead, you can very easily finish them off. Now then, moving into the team perks, take Strategic Strikes, which is going to give the entire team 20% more melee damage against extremist and terminus enemies. In siege mode, you are going to be seeing them a lot more often than what you would in operations, so this perk really does pay off, especially if you're playing assault and you have like a Bulwark on the team. It's going to be a buff that both of you are really going to benefit from. Now, moving on into the gear perk, I do take Precision Strike. Now, you do lose 50% of your damage radius. However, in turn, you get an additional 100% damage for your ground pound. The reason that I like this is sometimes it's just enough to take out extremists whenever they're spawning in, especially key targets like sorcerers. If you can take them out in one little melee shot or ground pound shot, it's a phenomenal way to keep the battle swinging in your favor. Again, just keep in mind, though, sometimes when you see those big groups of enemies, you may still kind of feel a little disbelief of like, what the hell, shouldn't they all be dead? That is the only downside to this, is your radius is going to be effective, but it is still big enough that if you are jumping into a solid group of enemies, you can still fill out a lot of the challenges for the assault class. Moving on to the next slot, I took Zealous Blow. So anytime that you get a ground pound, it's going to recharge the jump pack by 10%. Essentially, you do a ground pound, you kill 10 enemies. It's like you didn't even use that jump pack charge. You have another one that's ready to go. Even if you don't get 10, maybe you only get 5. So that's a 50% recharge. That's still a couple seconds less that you have to wait for your jump pack to fully recharge. That's going to get you airborne again and dishing out some monstrous damage. Finally, Diligence. Your ground pounds, they are going to deal 20% more damage. That is if they are fully prepared. However, the preparation time is going to increase by 25%. Now, one thing I will say, and I know we didn't cover prestige perks for the tactical, and I'm trying to stay away from that because I know not everybody is up to prestige 4 with every single class in the game. I want this to be as accessible to everyone. The main reason I run this is because of one of the prestige perks. Let me find it here real quick. Unyielding Oath. When you're charging a ground pound, you become invulnerable for 3 seconds. A lot of the time, that's going to be enough for you to fully prepare the ground pound itself. However, if you don't have that perk, just be aware that you are going to be able to take damage while you're up in the air charging your attack. Even though the 25% really isn't all that long of a time, if you are going against enemies that have a lot of range capabilities, so specifically Chaos, they might be able to turn you into a glorified clay pigeon. So if that is something that you have an issue with, I would recommend maybe using Pride and Duty, which anytime you do a finisher, the ground pound is going to deal 25% damage for 10 seconds, which honestly, I was kind of debating on running this one, but I did find myself getting a lot more use out of Diligence. Finally, for the signature perk, any use of a jump pack reloads your ranged weapon. It's just a nice little added buff. Plus, you also get a 50% damage increase for 10 seconds. Again, just a really nice buff in general because you don't really have a whole lot of ranged capabilities. So by having that 50% damage increase, plus you're normally going to be leading off with your jump pack anyways if you do need to take a target at range. This is just going to help you out, potentially save you some ammo. But also, a lot of the other signature perks within the assault class, I wasn't really crazy huge on them. I personally found that I get the most use out of this. So that's going to be the assault. Now, moving into the Vanguard, my opinion, probably the best class in the game for Siege. We'll talk about why here in a minute. But the nice thing with the Vanguard is you actually have probably, I would say, the most flexibility with this class within Siege. And that not only takes place with the weapons, but also, honestly, a lot of your perk choices. But let's go through the weapons here real quick. So for me personally, there's two main classes that I'm going to use. I'm going to either be using the Oculus Bolt Carbine or the Melta Rifle. Again, I kind of tailor this to what I am fighting. So normally whenever I'm spawning in, I'm grabbing the Oculus just because I know it works well against both Tyranid and Chaos. But if I find myself, you know, hey, I know this next wave is going to be Tyranids because I just fought Chaos, I will switch over to the Melta Rifle. However, on the Oculus Bolt Carbine, I did switch over to the Inferno Pistol. It's just a nice way to help kind of clear up enemies that are getting in close. Plus, you are also going to have the one perk that will allow you to recharge grenades. So this is a nice way to really make sure that you're able to do that. But looking at the Gathelmore Crusade, I did go with the alpha version of this for the Oculus Bolt Carbine. The main reason is, as you can see, every other variant of this only has a 1.5 headshot multiplier. This one has a 2. Also, you do get a little bit of buff to your accuracy, which is really nice. This is already a very smooth shooting bolter anyways. It feels like stupid easy. It's almost like, I guess the real life version would be like an automatic 22 where you just literally point and it'll do all the work for you. Here are the perks that I've chosen for this particular weapon. Again, the Inferno Pistol, just kind of a nice way to keep enemies off of you if you do find yourself getting overwhelmed. I do run the Ophelian Liberation. The main reason for this is because of the buff to, as you can see, the range and the rate of fire. Yes, you do get a lot more ammo with the Gathelmore Crusade, plus an extra round in the chamber. However, the range on it is pretty abysmal, and I did find specifically with the Inferno Pistol, range is actually a much bigger deal than with the Melta Rifle, so that's why I ended up picking this one. Here's the perk tree that I use for it. I will also say you do have a perk here that will give you an additional shot in the mag. So realistically, whenever I'm running this, it's actually 3 shots instead of 2. And then, of course, the chainsword here. Now, looking over at the perks here, so again, you actually really do have a lot of flexibility. I don't think there's really a right or wrong way to build out the Vanguard. However, there's one very key perk that honestly, it might be just on par with the Tacticals one perk for the entire team, but we'll talk about that here in a moment. For starters, moving target. So anytime you land a melee attack, you're going to take a 5% reduction in range damage. Now this will stack up to 30%. However, if you're not meleeing, or if you're not hitting somebody with your chain sword for 5 seconds, you do lose the effect. But I naturally do find myself getting into a lot of melee combat with the Vanguard. Honestly, I think it's just because of the grapple hook and it having a lot of challenges associated with it. Again, I just find myself doing a lot of melee combat, so this is something that really helps. Plus, you only have 2 bars of armor, so it is going to help keep you alive. Next, I go into close combat focus. Again, this is just something that's going to keep some of that pesky range damage from chipping away at your health. It's just a generic 20% damage buff against range damage. And then, again, going with consecutive execution, just like on the Assault, you get 7 kills in rapid succession. You get a free grenade from it. Now, here's honestly the bread and butter to this class, Unmatched Zeal. So I'm sure this perk needs no introduction, but anytime you or a teammate, you do a melee finisher on an extremist or a terminus level enemy, that person who performed the execution is going to restore 30% of their health. This is an absolute game changer. The main reason is if you have this perk attached, that's less Medicae stims that you're going to have to use, and by not buying those stims, because keep in mind, every time you buy them, that's 150 points. That's 150 points that you can invest in something else. And personally, if you are struggling, you know, as the waves go higher and higher, you are getting less points. That's 150 you could be investing into that dreadnought to help you out. Plus, you have a lot of extremists that spawn later on in the wave, so you can keep not only your health, but your team's health topped off quite a bit. Now, looking over into the gear, honestly, I'm not really blown away by any of the gear perks, but these are just what I use. So, Restless Fortitude, again, this is just helping mitigate as much range damage as possible. So, anytime you do a diving kick, which is essentially you are using the grapple launcher, you're going to take 40% less range damage for 10 seconds, which is pretty nice. And again, there's no drawback to it other than you do have to use the grapple launcher for it to occur, which it does have a little bit of a slower cooldown time. Then I use Tip of the Spear. So enemy that you hit with a diving kick, they're going to do they're going to take 15% more range damage for 10 seconds. What I really like about this is if I'm using the Melta rifle and I'm grappling onto something, as soon as the grapple animation's over and I go right into the Melta rifle, that 15% damage increase is kicked in. So those next couple of Melta shots, they're really going to be dishing out a fair bit of damage. Next, looking at Thrill of the Fight. So anytime that you do a perfectly timed parry, dock, or blodge, you take 20% less health damage for 5 seconds. You're going to be doing a lot of that. And again, with only having 2 bars of armor, there's a very good chance that you are going to be getting kind of chipped away at with your health. This is just something that's going to help keep you alive. Now then, a lot of these signature perks here, they're all really, really good. I would personally just say pick your favorite. I personally use Adrenaline Rush. Main thing is, again, this is the only class that can actually heal itself. I think that's a pretty cool ability, so I like to get as much use out of that as I can. Emperor's Blessing, though, is also really nice. It's very similar to a perk that is available for the sniper. However, with the sniper, you activate your camo cloak. With this, you just completely recharge your armor instead of going down. So if you do find yourself going down a lot and, you know, getting a 5% health increase or health restoration isn't doing it for you, it might be worth looking into this. Or if neither of those are tickling your fancy, Tactical Prowess is really good. Anytime an enemy has 33% or less health and you go in for a grapple launcher, you'll automatically go right into an execution. You won't have to worry about finishing off that remaining 33%. This is just really nice because if you have something like a Ravager that you know you've put a fair bit of damage on, but it keeps burrowing underground, maybe you already have it down to that 33%, you can hurry up, finish off that kill. Just keep in mind, though, as it says, it does not work with Terminus level enemies. I have seen some players try to do that. It says it right there in the open for you guys. Don't do it on the Terminus level enemies. It's fine to close in on them, but I've seen a lot of people in that go in for that grapple launcher and they expect that the execution's going to start queuing, and then that Hellbrute just turns around and smacks them with the big old hammer. So just keep that in mind. Now, also, I will throw out as well, the Instigator Bolt Carbine is available to the Vanguard. It's a phenomenal weapon. Personally, I just like the Oculus Bolt Rifle because I just have to hold down the trigger. I don't have to sit there and keep firing off burst. I just like to shut my brain off sometimes. What can I say? Now, looking over at my personal favorite class, the Bulwark. Honestly, it's pretty good, I would say, overall for Siege mode. But I don't think you get nearly the same level of use out of it as some of the other classes or compared to the Bulwark in operations. I'd still say the Bulwark is top tier for operations, but for Siege mode, it definitely does fall a little bit. Personally, the Power Sword is my favorite melee weapon in the game. As always, I'm going to be using the fencing style setup. Here's the perk tree. One of the things, though, that I would throw out with the Power Sword is you're going to get the best use out of it is if you're constantly switching between light and heavy attacks. If that's something that you don't like, if you too want to join me in shutting off your brain, I would recommend, honestly, the Chain Sword. I just have the plasma pistol on here because I wanted to mix things up a little bit. I have tried using the thunder hammer on the Bulwark. Honestly, I just really haven't been a fan with it, but thunder hammer does have a Space Wolf skin. So whenever my one Space Wolf loving friend is online, I do have a custom Bulwark armor set for the Space Wolves. That way we can act as a bunch of furries together and all that other fun stuff. But anyways, let's get into the perks here. So a lot really hasn't changed with this compared to my typical setup, but let's get right into it. Intimidating Aurora, or Aura. Anytime that you deal a perfectly timed parry, you're going to have a small little area of effect damage that takes place within 5 meters. It does have a 5-second cooldown. Sometimes it's just a nice little way to get rid of a couple of pesky little gaunts, things like that. Then the next one we have is Shock and Awe. So enemies within a shock area, they are going to take 25% more damage. This will actually partner with one of the perks that we'll be using, but it also works pretty well with shock grenades. Honestly, I do love running them on the Bulwark just because it's a nice little way to kind of contain enemies, maybe to a certain area, or prevent them from rushing in. Or if they are still going to push through, they're at least going to take some chip damage. Next, Defensive Advantage. This is the one that I was talking about that would pair with Shock and Awe. If you make a perfectly timed parry or block, you're going to have a shock area for 5 seconds. There's a 30-second cooldown on this, but you can trigger this off of anything as long as it's a perfectly timed parry or block. And it's just a nice little way to deal with some of the smaller Minoris enemies, and even a lot of times stun lock Majoris or higher. That way you can usually close in on them for the kill. Now, moving into the team perks, honestly, there's 2 that I would recommend. I choose Effective Formation, which is going to cause players to take 20% less health damage from Extremis and Terminus level enemies, just because during some of those higher waves, you are going to be seeing a lot of Extremists. Also, you can have up to 3 Terminus spawn at a time. Sometimes, if you have like 3 Carnifex that have all, for whatever reason, decided to aggro just one poor guy, this is going to be a way to help kind of keep them in the fight for a little bit. Hopefully allow them to get to a point where maybe they can lose aggro on at least one of them or 2 of them, but hopefully it just keeps your teammates alive. Another really good perk for that is Focus Restoration, which will every 30 seconds restore 1 armor segment for the entire team. This is something where it's a phenomenal passive ability, just because you oftentimes forget it's there until you just randomly see 1 bar of armor recharge and you've done nothing for it. But it is something that does help keep the entire team in the fight. Next, I go with Rapid Regeneration. So the banner will recharge your armor 30% faster, but its duration is reduced to 10 seconds. The reason I go with this is because there are a lot of times where you can get mobbed really easily, and the base regeneration of the banner just isn't enough to really get rid of a lot of the health damage that you would be taking. So Rapid Regeneration has been my fix for this. Again, I personally do run Invigorating Icon, which will allow you and your teammates to regain all contested health. It's a really nice way to essentially, if you have someone who's on the brink of death, bring them back up to full health. Of course, the issue is this perk has been nerfed. There is a 50% recharge penalty to it. Personally, for me, this isn't really that big of a deal because there are ways around it. However, that's only going to be through the prestige perk, Masterful Defense, which is anytime you block a range shot, you're going to restore your ability by 1% for each shot. So if you're fighting against Chaos, which has a fair bit of ranged weapons, especially some of the Terminators, it's very easy to rapidly refill your ability. However, if you're fighting against Tyranids, or just for whatever reason, a lot of the ranged Chaos enemies have already been taken out, it might be worthwhile looking into a different perk. Honestly, Glory Shield was the second choice that I had for this, just because On top of already getting your armor back very quickly with rapid regeneration, you're going to be taking 20% less damage, and it will also make the banner last 20% longer as well, which would ultimately add up for 12 seconds just because you're going to be working with an even 10. Finally, rejuvenating effect. Anytime you drop the banner, it's going to revive an incapacitated squad mate. A lot of times it's just going to be safer to drop the banner to pick somebody versus, actually holding down the icon to start the revive process. Plus, again, if you do have some of the prestige perks unlocked, you can become invulnerable while you do that. But we are trying to focus on just standard 25 levels here, not counting them in. But regardless, it is something nice because you don't actually have to dedicate a whole lot of your time to picking somebody up. Plus, everybody's going to have their armor recharge a lot faster, so it's a nice little way to bring somebody back without having to put yourself in a compromising position. Finally, for my signature, I run Defensive Mastery. Anytime you get a perfectly timed parry or block, it's going to automatically incapacitate a Majoris or Extremis level enemy. This is absolutely huge. It does have a 90-second cooldown timer. However, that, again, it will go a lot quicker than what you think. But it is really nice because there have been so many times where like a sorcerer or a terminator or like a lictor is spawned in, and all I have to do is just make one perfect parry and that enemy's taken out of the fight. You don't have to worry about doing anything else to them, especially with one of our other perks over here, defensive advantage. Sometimes just the shock field itself, once you incapacitate them, is enough to instantly kill them, so you don't even have to worry about going in for the execution. I will say though, sometimes you do want those executions, so if you do find yourself like, dang, I really wish I had the opportunity to execute that enemy because of my contested health, the other perks aren't too bad either. Honestly, emergency countermeasure was something that I ran for a very long time. Anytime you would, when your armor was fully depleted, you would essentially drop a free shock grenade. Both of these have a 90-second cooldown timer. And then Armored Advantage, or Armored Advance. Anytime that you have armor remaining and you cannot lose control or be knocked back, which is just something really nice to have because those hits can mess up your flow a little bit. Okay, now moving on to the sniper. This is honestly, for me, the class that has changed the most, and that is just honestly due to how siege mode is really set up. Typically with using the bolt sniper rifle, I just don't really find myself getting as much use out of it as that I do in like operations. Stalker bolt rifle isn't bad. However, what I actually found that I got the most use out of was the bolt carbine. And so I've tailored essentially my perks and all that to match up with this. Now, the bolt carbine does have two different kind of styles. You have your traditional SMG variant, and then you have more of kind of, I guess you would maybe call it a scout or a marksman style. Yeah, that's what they call it in here, is a marksman style bolt carbine. Sorry, my brain just shut off right there. If I want to run the SMG variant, I'm going to take the Ophelian Liberation. The reason I choose this is honestly just because of the increased magazine and ammo capacity, because this can chew through ammo rather quickly. If I do want to run the Marksman variant, I run the Gathelmore Crusade. Yeah, it'll say Marksman in the title as well. Main reason is you get a huge amount of accuracy bonus damage along with piercing. Yeah, it really looks like it's just going to be the accuracy. I just wanted to double check that there. But also, as you can see, the headshot multiplier for the Gathelmore Crusade is 2 versus the Ophelian Liberation is a 1.5. Those little headshots, or those headshot bonuses, they do add up rather quickly. Then I do use the heavy bolt pistol. Now, I would say you can also use the Inferno pistol as well. I just find I get more use out of the heavy pistol because honestly, the bolt carbine, I'm typically running it in the SMG variant. I do want something that I can get a little bit more range with. Honestly, for this one, I did switch over to the Gathlemore Crusade just because it has much higher accuracy. I'm okay with losing out on some ammo in exchange for accuracy with this particular build. Then I take the combat knife. Here's the perk tree for that. Again, it's the fencing. Honestly, this one moves really quick. One thing that I do want to throw out here is, let me see here real quick. It is, there we go, Shadow Stab. This does some monstrous damage if you can have it fully charged. In fact, you can, I want to say you can damn near one-shot a Terminus level enemy with it, or if not, at least do significant damage that's going to make them really easy to get rid of. So even if you don't like some of the other perks that I picked, I would at least make sure that you try to grab this, because we are also going to be using a little bit of melee in this build. But let's get into our actual perk selection here. So for starters, we're going to be running Medicae Adept. This is just going to allow us to revive squad members 30% faster. One of the things that I have found with the sniper class in particular with Siege, it's really good at getting into spots where there's already a large swarm of enemies. All you do is you just activate your cloak. You can run in there, hurry up, pick someone up, and immediately start engaging targets without having to worry about taking all that damage or having to fight your way up to your down teammate. Then high capacity, because like I said before, the bolt carbine, it does chew through ammo, so this is just going to give you a little 10% increase. It's nice. Honestly though, once you hit some of the higher waves, I still found myself needing to purchase ammunition during the wave itself. But at least, you know, if you have some solid teammates with you, you yourself might not actually have to worry about that. Then dexterous hands. So this specifically affects the bolt carbines. They're going to reload 20% faster, and you're going to have a spread and recoil reduction of 15%, which is just going to allow you to stay on target a lot easier. Then I run squad renewal. This is a really nice ability for your team. Anytime that somebody gets a headshot kill, their ability charge is going to restore by 10%. And again, that's for any squad member. Headshots are very easy to get in this game. All you need is 10 headshot kills, and your ability can go from completely empty to magically it's fully recharged. Next, purification, just because this is honestly the closest thing to a cheat code in this game. So anytime that you manually activate your camo cloak, it's going to stop all of your contested health and any negative status effects. So let's say, you know, you lost your armor and then you got from 100% health knocked down to 1%. Just immediately tap your camo cloak button, and all of a sudden it's like that hit never exists. Of course, you still will lose your armor, but all that contested health, you're going to completely regain it. Keep in mind, though, you do have to manually activate your camo cloak for this to occur. So any damage that you take afterwards, or if your camo cloak triggers for any other reason, you won't get that bonus to it. Next, I went with Tactical Ambush because this pairs really nice with the Shadow Stab perk for our combat knife. So the first melee attack that breaks camo cloak deals 150% more damage. This is just kind of a way to really make sure that if you don't have the full amount of time to charge up the Shadow Stab ability, you're still going to be able to deal some brutal melee damage to whatever enemy it is that's in front of you. But again, I like using this personally on Terminus level enemies, or even like Biovores enemies that typically can tank a fair bit of damage. This is just a really nice and easy way to get rid of them. Plus, it also kind of makes the sniper play more of a close quarters combat role, which is a lot different from how I normally play it, so I quite enjoy it. Another perk, though, that you can take is Guardian Protocol, which will just give anybody that you pick up a camo cloak for 5 seconds, which isn't bad, but honestly 5 seconds goes by rather quick, and sometimes I've just found it better to completely eliminate an enemy versus trying to pick someone up and still having that enemy on the field. Next, Lingering Concealment. So anytime that you would do an attack that would cause you to break camo, you remain hidden for 2 additional seconds. This is nice because, one, you can still usually pop a couple enemies before they're going to start to aggro you, but also it does pair really well with one of the sniper's siege challenges. It'll allow you to complete that a little bit easier. And then finally, for the signature perk, we are going to be running Emergency Override, which is, again, a nice little get-out-of-jail-free card because the sniper is a little bit of a glass cannon, but anytime that you would receive lethal damage, you're instead going to pop your camo. You'll still remain alive, and you'll be invulnerable for 5 seconds, so it gives you a little bit of a head start to get out of an area that maybe you shouldn't have been in, or reposition to a better area. Just something nice to help keep you alive. And now, finally, on to the last class here, the Heavy. So, in terms of weaponry, honestly, most of the time, I've just been running the Heavy Bolter on this. I will say, though, if you're not a fan of that, then the other primary I would recommend would be the Heavy Plasma Incinerator. This is still really, really good at clearing large groups of enemies that have all clustered around together. However, I just kind of found something that's a little bit more mobile that doesn't require constant charging up to be overall more effective. But if you have a quality team that's able to keep people off of you, the Heavy Plasma Incinerator is a really good pick. I go with the Warhammer Crusade, again, just purely because of the ammo increase to it. And with the Heavy Plasma Incinerator, I do run the Heavy Bolt Pistol. That's just, again, something so that I can kind of reach out a little bit further and touch whatever needs to be touched out there. However, most of the time I am going to be running the Heavy Bolter with the Inferno Pistol. Still going to be running the Ophelian Liberation. However, for the Heavy Bolter here, I run the Warhammer Crusade Alpha. The main reason for this is actually because of the accuracy. The Heavy Bolter can really dish out some stupid, crazy amounts of damage if you're nailing headshots with it. And this is going to allow you to stay on target extremely easily. So this has been my preferred one of choice. Granted, you are going to take a little bit of hit to the ammo. So if that is very important to you, then you can run the Warhammer Crusade Beta, which will address that a little bit. Honestly, these other two here, I just really haven't seen much of a use to use them. The Ophelian Liberation Alpha isn't too bad because you can reduce your venting speed quite a bit, but most of the time I've just found that by switching to my sidearm, I can clear what's ever up close to me rather quickly, and normally by the time I switch back over, the Heavy Bolter is good to go. Now, looking into the perk tree here, let's go ahead and start off with our first perk, Restoration. So this is very similar to the grenade recharge ability. However, this is going to affect your armor. The cooldown timer to this is only 15 seconds, so very, very short, but essentially just get 7 kills really quick and you recharge a free armor segment. With the Heavy, this is going to be incredibly easy to do. Now, if you are going to run the Melta Rifle, I would say use multi-kill, just because you are going to be able to conserve some ammo with it, especially if you are clearing out hordes. I personally, unless I'm just kind of goofing around with friends, if I'm really trying to get as far as I can go with Siege, I'm not using the Melta Rifle, but that's just me personally. It still is a really good weapon, but again, you do take a little bit of a damage penalty against Rubric Marines, so that's why I do tend to stick more to the Heavy Bolter, where I don't have to worry about any sort of damage reduction. Next, Thermal Boost. Now, this is also why I go with the Heavy Bolter and at times also the Heavy Plasma Incinerator. So any time that your ranged weapon is 50% overheated, or you have 50% ammo in your magazine, which I guess that would actually help with the Melta Rifle there, you get a rage damage increase of 15%. This is really good with the Heavy Bolter because as you're firing, once you get to 50% of the heating cycle for it, you're going to start dishing out some extra damage. And if you're railing headshots on a Terminus with that, you're going to see that 15% damage increase kick in, and it's going to be pretty noticeable. Next, overwhelming power. This is, again, I try to get as much damage out of the heavy as I can. So while Iron Halo is activated, all squad members within 10 meters, everybody's going to get a 10% damage increase. So not only do you have a field up that you can help protect your friends from range damage, but you're going to be dishing out more range damage to the enemy in return. Of course, additional supplies gives everybody a 25% ammo increase. This is just phenomenal to have in general, but it's a nice way to save players from having to constantly go back and buy more and more ammo. Again, you can just allocate those points to something that's more important or something that will help your team out in the current situation. If for whatever reason you don't want to run that, Bonds of Brotherhood is really nice because you're going to revive somebody. Instead of having 50% health, they'll have their health completely restored. Now then, moving on into the gear, Emperor's Protection. So whenever Iron Halo eventually does go out, one armor segment is going to be restored for all squad members. This is just really nice because I find myself popping Iron Halo as often as I can. So whenever it does go out, and it will, everybody's going to get a free armor piece for it. Again, it's just one of those perks that's going to help keep everybody alive. If you really don't want that, I would recommend Consecutive Execution just so you can get some grenades back. Then moving into the next spot, we got that word Bastion. Sorry, can't figure that out. I'm not going to try and hook on phonics that shit right now. But anyways, it's just going to increase Iron Halo's durability by 20%. The main reason for this is because if Iron Halo does sustain enough damage, it will deactivate, and that doesn't count as it expanding or expending all of its energy. So perks like Emperor's Protection will not kick in. So by having that extra 20% durability, that's going to increase our chances of some of those perks kicking in. Then Brute Force. So whenever Iron Halo does go on cooldown, regardless of if it just takes too much damage or expends all of its energy, you and only you are going to get a 15% range damage increase. So if Iron Halo's up, you get a 10%. If it's on cooldown, you're getting 15%. Again, it's just something that's really keeping that damage up. Again, another perk that wouldn't be too bad to run though with the heavy, especially if you want to revive your teammates or you find yourself doing that a good bit. Saving Grace, not only will it recharge all of your armor shards, but it will also restore all of Iron Halo's charge as well, which is honestly really good. I wish this was maybe in this slot over here, and then I would say for sure pick that. Finally, Conversion Field. So while Iron Halo is active, all squad members within 20 meters, which is pretty generous, they're going to recharge their abilities 50% faster. And so that wraps us up with all the different builds that I use for all of my classes here. Again, at the very end of the day, mastering the basic mechanics, that's what's going to help you get to some of those higher waves and all that other good stuff. But if you already have the mechanics down, maybe you're just thinking like, hey, my build's not working that good. Hopefully this kind of gave you some very general ideas that you can use for each and every class, and also just some additional information, because that's always good. Knowledge is half the battle. But that's it for me, and thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.